They say a photograph can steal a soul. But what happens when the photograph doesn't take it? Only traps it, waiting for someone else to set it free. The first time the photograph of the Mulberry family was unsealed, the air inside the room changed. It grew still, heavy, as though the walls were holding their breath. The archivist who opened it, an old man named Dr. Eugene Halcroft, collapsed within minutes. His assistant said he had whispered something before he died, something she couldn't quite make out through the gurgle in his throat. But later, under hypnosis, she remembered. He had said, "They're still moving." The photograph was dated 1864. 7 figures in a root cellar, their faces pale, their eyes dull, their bodies too straight, too deliberate. But if you looked long enough, something seemed to shift in the grain of the image. The hands twitched, the eyes turned slightly toward you, as if acknowledging your gaze. Those who have seen it say it's not a family portrait. It's documentation. The cellar itself was found beneath what remained of a plantation called Mulberry House, an estate long abandoned, its foundations sinking into red Louisiana clay. The structure was ordinary enough until the crew began to dig beneath the floorboards of the north wing. What they found wasn't a cellar, but a chamber, brick walls, slick with age, iron rings fixed into stone, and 7 chairs, each bolted to the ground. On the far wall, painted in something dark that never dried, were the words, "Perfection requires sacrifice." The workers left before sundown. They didn't return. The foreman burned his clothes that night and told his wife he'd seen the faces of people who should not exist. What happened beneath Mulberry House in the final winter of the Civil War was not a crime of passion. It was a study. The man who lived there, Dr. Silas Mulberry, had come home from the Confederate battlefields changed. His hands steady, his speech precise, his eyes cold with purpose. He spoke of refinement, of purging imperfection, of building a better bloodline. His neighbors thought him eccentric. His wife thought him enlightened, until the day her children began to disappear from their beds at dawn, only to return hours later with identical scars along their hairlines and an emptiness behind their smiles. Which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Because somewhere, buried in those southern fields, the Mulberry family might still be waiting for someone to answer. By the time investigators reached the ruins of Mulberry House in 1928, there was almost nothing left but stone and silence. The war had taken its toll, and the Louisiana swamps had reclaimed what man once built. Yet even the locals, hardened, superstitious men who cut cypress and hunted gators, refused to go near the property. They said the ground hummed, that if you pressed your ear to the soil, you could still hear the chains rattle below. The team who arrived were not police. They were not historians. They were sent by a private institution based out of Boston, the Eidolon Society for Medical Advancement, though the name no longer appears in any official registry. Their interest was not the plantation's architecture, but the rumors of what had been done in its cellar. Silas Mulberry had been a field surgeon for the Confederate Army, but letters uncovered decades later suggested he was conducting operations not sanctioned by any known military unit. He wrote of neurological inversions, of transferring purity, and of something called the communion trials. The letters were never mailed. They were found sewn into the lining of his daughter's wedding dress, the one buried with her. The society's excavation began in secret. By the 3rd day, they reached the brick vaults below the north wing, exactly where the photograph had been discovered years prior. The air was damp, the walls breathing faintly with condensation. One of the men, a researcher named Theodore Lane, claimed to hear something behind the wall, a wet scraping sound, rhythmic, patient. When they broke through, they found a second chamber, smaller and lined with glass jars. Each jar contained tissue, preserved faces, distorted but unmistakably human. One jar, however, was different. Inside was not flesh, but a single object, a lens, round and fractured, etched with something resembling a spiral carved from within. Lane insisted on studying it under lamplight. Within minutes, his nose began to bleed. He said the lens was showing him reflections that didn't belong to this century. When they took it from him, he clawed at the table and screamed that the Mulberry children were still alive in the glass. That night, Lane slit his throat on the edge of a mirror shard. His journal, later recovered from the site, contained one final entry. The experiments were not meant to improve the body. They were meant to trap the soul, to perfect it by isolation, and beneath the final line, written in blood, they perfected 7. The Eidolon Society withdrew after Lane's death. Officially, their report concluded the site was contaminated, unfit for continued excavation. But witnesses from nearby parishes claimed the truth was far simpler. The men fled before sunrise, leaving their equipment, their notes, even their dead. When the sheriff's office entered the ruins weeks later, they found 7 wooden coffins lined neatly in a semicircle. None bore a name. Each was sealed with iron nails, though the lids were warped from within, as if something had pushed upward once and stopped. The bodies inside were not decomposed, not bloated, not skeletal, simply paused, their skin pale, waxen, unrotted, their eyes still moist. Tests conducted years later revealed the same anomaly: no bacterial activity, no cellular breakdown, and no trace of embalming. The blood had blackened, but never clotted. It was as if death had been instructed to wait. Among the 7, 3 were confirmed Mulberry children, the remaining 4, unknown. One was a woman in her 20s, another a man of considerable size, the others small, malformed, their features distorted but deliberate. Pinned to the wrist of one corpse was a note, written in precise cursive: "Perfection must be observed to remain intact." The handwriting matched samples of Dr. Silas Mulberry. After that discovery, the bodies were sent to the State University in Baton Rouge for study. Within days, the lead pathologist resigned, citing ethical unrest. He would later hang himself from the rafters of his own laboratory. In his suicide note, he wrote only, "They don't blink when you look away." By the 1940s, the Mulberry specimens were quietly sealed in a military cold storage facility in Virginia under the pretext of pathological preservation. The project name on the inventory, Eidolon. But the strangest event came decades later, 1973, when a janitor working night shift inside that same facility reported hearing weeping through the steel of the storage vault. He assumed a leak or a trick of air pressure, but when he pressed his ear to the door, he swore he heard a child whisper, something that froze him in place. "Tell father the eyes still work." The janitor quit the next morning, leaving behind his badge and a note to his supervisor. It said, "They're not dead, they're practicing." No one has opened Vault the second since. The records stop there. But if you go to the Louisiana archives, the photograph, the one that killed Dr. Halcroft, still sits sealed in an acid-free sleeve. And if you dare to glance at it under magnification, you'll see 7 faces, and behind them, faintly, a shadow, taller than the rest, standing in the doorway. Some believe that's Dr. Silas Mulberry himself. Others say it's whoever took the photograph. In the spring of 1982, a real estate developer named Calvin Merrin purchased a tract of land in rural Satine, Landry Parish, unaware that it stood on what was once the northern edge of the old Mulberry property line. He planned condominiums clean, efficient, forgettable. Within weeks of the first dig, his crew hit stone. It wasn't a foundation. It was a wall, 10 feet deep, carved from black limestone. Inside it, sealed with pitch, they found a door. When the foreman forced it open, the stench that escaped made one worker vomit and another faint. But what they found was worse, an underground corridor lined with cages, iron bars, floor to ceiling, each containing something that looked human once. Bones bound with copper wire, skulls split vertically, spines fused into a single structure, like someone had tried to make one body from many. At the end of the corridor stood a single chair, upright, its straps intact. And beside it, a photograph. The same image from 1864, but this one was different. It wasn't faded or cracked with age. It was fresh, printed on modern paper, the ink still glossy. Calvin Merrin took the photo home that night. By morning, his wife found him sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded neatly, eyes open but unseeing. On the back of the photo, someone had written in blue ink, "Our lives through what we remember." Merrin's death made the news for a week. Then it didn't. The case was declared an aneurysm. The police never recovered the photograph. But weeks later, local children began reporting a man near the tree line at dusk. A figure in an old Confederate surgeon's coat, his hands black with soot. He'd stand watching the road as they passed, silent, head tilted slightly as if studying them. One girl said he asked her, "Do your eyes still dream?" When investigators came, they found footprints that began in the mud and ended mid-step, as though whoever had walked there had simply been erased. A year later, a historian named Lydia Harrow, studying Civil War medical records, uncovered an unfiled letter at Tulane University, addressed to the Confederate Medical Bureau, but never sent. The signature, E.S. Mulberry, M.D. It read, "I have learned what the body can endure before it forgets its origin. The spirit can be captured if one replaces memory with replication. My children will endure this century and the next. Their minds will return when the time is right." Lydia thought it a hoax until she saw the bottom corner of the page. A fingerprint pressed into the paper. Still oily, still warm, she submitted the document for forensic testing. The report came back impossible. The print belonged to a living person, and the name that matched it, from a Louisiana birth registry in 1981, was Calvin Merrin's newborn son. The child's name was Nathaniel Merrin, born March 9, 1981. By all accounts, he was healthy, quiet, observant, strangely calm for an infant. His mother, Caroline, said he would stare at mirrors for hours, never crying, never blinking, as if he was waiting for something to look back. The doctors dismissed it as infant fixation. But by the time Nathaniel turned 6, strange things began to happen in the house. Caroline would wake at night to find every door unlatched, though she swore she had locked them herself. The mirrors in the hallway, newly installed, began to fog from the inside, the glass swelling outward like it was breathing. And Nathaniel began to hum, a low, rhythmic tone that matched the sound of the wind through the cypress trees. He said it helped him remember. When she asked what that meant, the boy replied, "The walls told me where we came from." No one could explain the sudden smell of formaldehyde that filled the air when he spoke those words. By the time he was 10, his teachers noticed something else. His handwriting. It was beautiful, too elegant for a child, each letter looped in perfect 19th century cursive. When his notebook was later compared to surviving documents from Dr. Silas Mulberry, the results were identical. Caroline took him to a neurologist. The scans came back normal, but one image, a cross-section of the boy's brain, showed something no one could name. Along the base of his skull, just above the spinal column, there was a faint metallic shimmer. Not a fragment, not an implant. Something growing. Within a year, Nathaniel began to speak of father, not his father. Father. The one who lived in the glass. He said father told him that his blood was perfect, and that soon the others would find him. In 1994, when Nathaniel was 13, Caroline went missing. Neighbors reported hearing chanting from the house the night before. A guttural, harmonic rhythm that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Police found no signs of struggle. Only a pool of water by the mirror in her bedroom and a single handprint, pressed from the inside of the glass. Nathaniel was taken into state custody, but every photo taken of him came out wrong. Blurred, warped. In some, his face was doubled. In others, he appeared behind himself. One version smiling faintly, while the other stared directly at the camera. A social worker described him as polite, brilliant, and utterly hollow. Her final note, before she transferred off the case, read simply, "He doesn't cast a shadow in direct light." Nathaniel vanished from foster care records in 1999. The last person to see him was a nurse, who said he was humming again, the same tune that once echoed through the Mulberry cellar over a century ago. When she asked what song it was, he smiled and said, "It's not a song, it's a signal." The recording surfaced in 2003. A sound technician named Howard Kells, working with the Louisiana State Police, was analyzing interference captured during an emergency broadcast test. The file was faint, barely audible, but beneath the static was something deliberate, a continuous, rhythmic hum. At first, it seemed mechanical, like distant machinery, but when slowed to half speed, the frequency formed a pattern, 7 distinct pulses, repeating at exact intervals. 7. Howard ran the audio through a spectrogram filter. What appeared wasn't random noise. It was a shape, a spiral, coiled clockwise, with 7 notches spaced evenly along its arc. He didn't recognize it, but archivists at Tulane did. The same pattern had been etched into the fractured lens, recovered from the Mulberry cellar in 1928. The file was marked for further study. Within a week, Howard Kells was found dead in his home, his headphones still around his neck. The walls covered with mathematical symbols drawn in black ink. Investigators noted that the numbers corresponded to biometric frequencies, the kind produced by the human brain during REM sleep. On his desk sat a single note. "It isn't sound. It's memory trying to breathe." After that, the signal appeared again, broadcast intermittently across AM frequencies throughout the American South, always around 3:17 AM, each time the same hum, the same spiral in its spectrogram, the same 7 pulses. It wasn't random. It was a transmission in 2004. An independent radio archivist named Elaine Dorr traced the source of the broadcast to an unregistered relay tower deep in the Atchafalaya Basin, the swamplands that once surrounded the Mulberry estate. She brought a camera crew, hoping for proof of pirate signals or Cold War leftovers. The footage she captured was never aired, but fragments were leaked years later. Trees half drowned in black water, a clearing filled with animal bones, arranged in a perfect circle, and at the center, a small iron door rising from the mud, bolted shut. On its surface, carved in letters deep and sure, was a phrase repeated 7 times. "Perfection requires remembrance." When the door was pried open, The crew found a tunnel leading straight down, smooth stone walls, bone dry, and a faint light pulsing below. The sound grew louder with every step. Elaine's final words on the recording: "It's not coming from a machine. It's coming from beneath us." The camera flickered. The hum shifted pitch, no longer mechanical but human. 7 voices, merging, harmonic, calling in unison. The last frame caught a reflection on the tunnel wall, a boy's face, pale and motionless, watching from the dark. DNA tests on a strand of hair, recovered from the site later, confirmed what authorities refused to publish. The sample matched that of Nathaniel Merrin, age 13, missing since 1999. But here's the impossible part. The mitochondrial sequence was identical to Dr. Silas Mulberry, born 1822. In 2007, the state authorized a limited excavation of the Mulberry ruins. Officially, it was listed as a historical preservation survey. Unofficially, it was containment. The investigation was led by Dr. Adrian Lyle, a forensic anthropologist with the U.S. Department of Defense. He'd studied cases involving mass graves, wartime remains, and medical crimes that governments preferred to forget. But nothing, not even the Balkan vaults or the Khmer crypts, resembled what lay beneath the Louisiana soil. The entrance was the same iron door Elaine Dawes' team had found, the one that had pulsed with light and sound. When they descended, instruments began to fail, compasses spun, batteries drained, and radio contact dissolved into the same low hum that had haunted the airwaves for years. What they found beneath the swamp wasn't a cellar. It wasn't even a room. It was alive. The floor was covered in a pale membrane, thin as paper, soft as flesh, stretching from wall to wall like a single continuous skin. Beneath it, faint veins pulsed with a slow rhythm, moving to the beat of something vast and unseen. The deeper they went, the warmer it became. The sound was now inside their heads, no longer heard but felt. A resonance vibrating through their teeth and lungs. At the center of the chamber stood a structure made of glass and bone. 7 vertical pillars encircled a stone slab. Inside each pillar was a human form, suspended upright, eyes open, skin translucent. Their chests rose and fell with mechanical precision. Alive but not living. Dr. Lyle approached the slab. Etched into its surface was a spiral, and within that spiral, words carved in immaculate cursive. "We have refined what God abandoned." Suddenly, the lights flickered. One of the figures, female, young, opened her mouth. A tremor rippled through the membrane floor. From the pillars, a whisper began to leak, soft but collective, as though 7 mouths shared a single throat. "He promised we would never end." Lyle ordered the team to retreat. But one technician refused to move. He was staring into the glass, transfixed. His breathing slowed, his pupils dilated, and when they tried to pull him back, his body convulsed violently. When they dragged him free, they realized the veins beneath the membrane had attached themselves to his boots, threading upward like vines. He screamed once, then his voice split, echoing in 2 tones at once. The samples taken from the chamber later revealed something impossible. Every surface, every wall, every vein shared the same DNA profile, not human, not animal, but 7 sequences grafted together, each strand corresponding to one of the Mulberry subjects recovered in 1928. They hadn't died, they had merged. Before sealing the site, Dr. Lyle sent one final encrypted message to his superiors. The Mulberry experiments achieved what they intended. Consciousness doesn't die, it migrates. The structure is learning. The chamber was resealed. The swamp reclaimed it. 3 months later, Dr. Lyle was found in his home, surrounded by mirrors, all shattered outward. the words scrawled across the wall in his handwriting. "The children are dreaming through the glass again." It began quietly, as these things always do. In early 2009, families across the southern states began reporting strange interference on home electronics. Televisions flickering at 3:17 a.m., baby monitors emitting low tones, mirrors fogging without cause. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, a regional power anomaly. Then came the photographs. Parents began to notice distortions in images of their children, faces appearing twice, eyes misaligned, reflections smiling when the subject did not. In one widely circulated case from Baton Rouge, a school portrait of a 7-year-old girl revealed something horrifying when enhanced. A faint silhouette of a boy standing inside her reflection, his hands pressed against the glass, mouth open as if whispering. The file was traced back to the processing lab. The technician who developed it went missing the same night. On his workstation, investigators found a looped audio recording of the familiar hum, the Mulberry frequency. It wasn't being broadcast anymore. It was emanating from the negatives themselves. By autumn, the phenomenon had spread beyond Louisiana. Homes as far north as Indiana began to experience mirror bleeding, where condensation formed on the inside of mirrors, running like tears. Children who stared into them for too long began to speak in unison, repeating the same phrase. "Has almost done remembering." Psychologists called it mass hysteria. Clergy called it possession. The government called it nothing at all. But a group of independent researchers, former members of the Eidolon Society, believed they knew the truth. They called it the glass child effect, theorizing that Dr. Silas Mulberry's consciousness had fractured across generations, seeding itself through images, through reflections, through the very act of observation. One of them, Dr. Tamsin Rowe, described it perfectly in her final field report before she vanished in 2010. He discovered the loophole of mortality. He taught his blood to travel through vision. Across every case, the same anomaly appeared. Children born between 1999 and 2006 shared a specific chromosomal mutation, the same 7-strand structure extracted from the resurrection chamber. No one could explain how it propagated, but the pattern was unmistakable. It wasn't just in bloodlines anymore. It was infectious through sight. In December 2011, a power outage swept across southern Louisiana. For 3 nights, the region went dark. When power returned, entire neighborhoods were found abandoned, tables still set for dinner, televisions frozen on blank screens. On the walls of one home, written in black mold, were the words, "They saw him. He saw back." Satellite imagery later revealed something even more unsettling from above. The abandoned grid of streets formed a perfect spiral, 7 loops, identical to the Mulberry insignia carved in the chamber stone. And at the center of that spiral stood a single standing mirror, upright in the mud, untouched by decay. Those who dared to look into it said they saw not their own reflection, but 7 figures behind them, breathing in rhythm. By 2013, the Mulberry phenomenon had entered a phase no one could explain. Reflections began behaving autonomously, not violently, worse than that, patiently. Security footage from an abandoned hospital in St. Mary Parish captured the moment clearly, a man walking past a glass door, his reflection hesitating, half a second too long before following. When authorities reviewed the recording, the reflection blinked once, directly into the camera, while the man himself never did. The video was sealed, but copies leaked. Viewers reported nausea, migraines, and a strange metallic taste in their mouths after watching. One forum moderator claimed to have heard whispering in his speakers long after he'd closed the file. The seventh one sees you now. The seventh one. Every recorded event tied back to the same number. 7 pulses, 7 faces, 7 descendants. The seventh reflection, they said, was the final vessel. In 2015, a research team led by Dr. Evelyn Ward reopened the case under the guise of neurovisual pathology. They cross-referenced every recorded case of mirror interference since 2000. Over 4,000 incidents. Every one of them occurred within a 700-mile radius of the original Mulberry Plantation. Ward's team discovered something extraordinary buried inside the old spectrogram data. The hum, when inverted, produced a voice, a male voice, slow and deliberate, speaking English with an accent that matched 19th century Louisiana aristocracy. When filtered further, the words became clear. The seventh will remember what the first forgot. Ward traced the earliest of these reflections to a single surviving family, the descendants of Nathaniel Merrin. One child, age 12, born 2001, living under witness protection in Northern Virginia. The girl's name was Clara Merrin. When interviewed, Clara didn't speak at first. She simply stared into the one-way observation glass. Then, in a voice too deep to belong to her, she said, "Father said he'd come through the seventh. He only needs a name." Moments later, the lights in the observation room flickered. Every reflective surface, windows, phones, even the shine of the table, darkened simultaneously, as though the glass itself had turned to liquid. Security footage caught a shape forming behind her reflection, tall, skeletal, familiar. The child smiled. "He's here." When the lights returned, the glass was empty. So was the chair. Clara Merrin was never seen again. The official record ends there, but one detail remains, one buried file marked MLBRWHARCHAV7. Inside, there is only a single image. A modern photograph, timestamped 2016. A group of 7 figures, standing in a dark room that looks like the Mulberry Cellar reborn. Same stone walls, same spiral carved into the floor. At the center, a man in a surgeon's coat, his face half hidden by shadow. The metadata lists the camera that took it. A model discontinued in 1973, and the photographer, registered under the name Nathaniel S. Mulberry. Below the image, a caption written in faint cursive. "Perfection is patient," and in the reflection of the glass that encases the photo, if you look close enough, you'll see another figure standing just behind them. Someone holding your expression, your eyes, as if you've already been remembered. End of record.